In this video, I want to show you how to make a very rugged speaker box as well as speaker wire to go with it. In this tutorial, I am using an ammo box, an exterior extension cord, some tools such as a utility knife, some electrical pliers, some wrenches and screwdrivers, some banana jacks and some banana plugs, a drill with some drill bits, a Dremel tool, and some speakers with the included mounting hardware. For the first step, I'm going to remove the voice coil just to give a little extra clearance when I mount this. So to do this, just remove the screw in the center. This might be covered up with a sticker. So I'm just going to remove this entire assembly. Very careful not to damage it. I'm going to set this aside. This is very sensitive, so make sure this cannot be crushed by anything. Next up, I'm going to measure the diameter of this part of the housing. If your speakers came with a template, you could skip this step. For some reason, this is the wrong scale, so obviously this will not work, so I can't use the template that came with these speakers. An alternative is to just put this flat and trace a circle around here, then you'll know the exact size on a template. So hold it flat and just trace around it. And I'm just going to cut this out so I could have the paper. Next up, I'm going to mark the direct center of the box that I'm putting the speakers in. So I know this is 9.5 inches wide, so I'm going to mark at 4 3/4 inches. So this is the direct center of the ammo box. Now I'm going to see how the speaker will look when it's mounted, so I want to make sure there's plenty of room all the way around it. Next, I want to decide how far from the bottom and or top I want to mount it. So I'm just going to measure about 3/4 inch. There's still plenty of room up top, and there's plenty of room down below. So I'm just going to mark this across all the way so I know where to mount it. Next, I'm going to eyeball where I want it to sit side to side. So I'm just going to center it in between this wall and the center right here. That looks good enough for me. So I'm just going to measure from one side so I know how far to put it, the other speaker. So it's about 1/2 inch. So I just need to line up this right here, make it a 1/2 inch right here, and I'm just going to trace a circle around it. Next, I'm going to position the template in the direct center. Doesn't need to be perfect. I'm just going to eyeball it here. And this is the hole that I need to mark. So now I'm just going to repeat for the other speaker. To cut the hole out, my 10 stumps are way too big to try to make this radius. So what I ended up doing is getting my Dremel tool, and I just put an 1/8 inch drill bit in it. So I'm going to show you how to cut this out fairly quickly. So I'm just going to plunge it into it and then just move around the edge. I have this at the highest speed. You got to keep moving quickly or it'll melt the plastic. To clean up the edges, I just use a utility knife to wipe it away. Then I just do a test fit with the speaker housing, make sure it fits. This one fits okay. So I just do this to both sides. Next, I'm going to drill the through holes to mount this plate. So to do this, I'm going to position it so that the voice coil will not interfere with anything on the back side. So I have plenty of clearance above it and below it in my case. So I'm just going to position it like it is and then drill through. So these speakers come with a screw that has a washer on the back. This goes through the material and then this goes on the back of it, and this is self-locking just by the shape of it. So as it tightens down, this forms a washer and a nut at the same time. So I'm just going to drill through all the way through quickly. Then I'm just going to stick the screws in. On the back side, I'm just going to put the washer over it. And by holding the washer, I'm going to screw this in. So it should start to tighten down. And it should become self-locking at some point. So this is already self-locking, so it's just going to tighten it down. So I'm not going to do too much because then it'll just bend the spring too much. So that's good right there. So now I'm going to do this one. Now that this is secure, repeat for the next speaker. Next, I'm going to drill the holes for the banana plugs to fit through. These specific banana plugs use a 5/16 drill bit for them to fit through. So this will sit right here. This little shoulder fits into the hole. This keeps it electrically isolated from the fixture. So if this was steel, you could still use this because this is separated by this plastic piece. It's not ideal, but it will work. I'm not worried about it because this is plastic anyways. So I'm just going to mark approximately where I want to drill. It's not too important for me, so I'm just going to mark right here, and right beneath it I'm going to put the second one. So I'm going to slip the isolating piece over like this. Then I'm going to fit this on the outside. So this will just sit in here. Should look something like this. Then on the inside, I'm going to put the cap piece. So I'm going to put the open side facing inward. On top of this, I'm going to put a washer. And for now, I'm going to secure both of these nuts. And it should sit something like this. Then I'm just going to repeat the process for the next black one and also the other plugs if you want to wire these speakers up separately. And I'm just going to set the speaker box aside for now. Next step, I'm going to cut the ends to the plugs off. So I'm just going to snip this right here. Next, I'm going to strip away some of the insulation, not for the wires, just this red part. I'm going to strip it about 2 inches or so back to have some room. So I'm just going to make a slit across here around the entire circumference. Now this should just slide off. Now you have some exposed wires. So the way these banana jacks works is this is an insulation piece, so this just slides up and you can remove this bottom piece. There are tiny screws here, so I'm just going to unscrew this. So the wire will slide in here and then these screw down to secure it. Next step, I'm going to strip the insulation off the wire. You don't want to go too long, it just needs to be long enough to fit in here. I don't want any exposed wire. So this is about 3/8 of an inch should do. Here's a test fit so you see it's long enough so both screws can hit it. Next I'm going to tighten down the wires to make sure they're nice and tight together. Then I'm going to insert it into the end right here. So it's just going to insert like this, make sure it doesn't hit any of the set screws. If they're hitting, then you could just back them out. So I'm able to fit all the way in. So now I'm just going to tighten down the set screws. Make sure it's secure. Then put the insulator over the top of it. So again, it just screws onto these threads here. Make sure there's no exposed wire. So this is nice and tight. The only way you can make contact is right here at the end. Now I'm going to repeat the steps that I just did on the other end of the cord. Now I'm going to grab the cord, the ammo box, the drivers, and the voice coils and go upstairs to the soldering iron. Next up, I'm going to solder some speaker wire to the voice coil before I install it back into the speaker. So I'm going to put it like this. These little tabs will face outward from the speaker. So I'm going to position them like this and bend them out if they're bent. First thing I'm going to do is get some of the flux and just put a little bit on the connectors. What this flux does is it allows the solder to flow much better, so it'll get through all between the wires and make a solid connection. So I'm going to get the soldering iron and wipe it on my wet sponge. Next, I'm just going to melt some solder directly onto the wire. I'm going to heat it a little bit more just to distribute it. And I'm going to put a little bit on the solder tip itself. Next, I'm going to put the wire against the connector and it should start to melt the solder. I'm going to hold the end of the voice coil with my finger just to keep it steady. Press the wire against here and let it start to melt the solder. There we go. So you can see once it melts, it immediately wets out the surface and creates a nice connection like that. Now I'm going to repeat for the other side. So I found this easier to actually put some solder here and put some solder on the end of the connector before you push the wire against it. And the connection should look something like this. You can see this solder has wetted out on the connector side of the voice coil. That's what you're going for to make a solid connection around the wire. Next step, it's time to put the voice coil and the driver back on. The wires from the voice coil will sit inside this little groove here. So there's just enough clearance for these wires to sit inside there. So I'm going to sit them, be very careful not to touch the voice coil wires. And one thing, these holes right here on the voice coil will also line up with these little pins on the driver each side. So I'm just going to position them like that and they should be locked into place. So it should sit flat just like that. So I'm going to back out the screw just a little bit, just so it's sticking out about that much. And I'm going to hold the voice coil flat. Be careful not to touch this because this is very sensitive. So I'm just going to push this up against the frame. Push the screw in and I'm just going to start tightening it by hand. Once it's tightened by hand, you could either get a bit like this and screw this in by hand, or I just have this little sideways screwdriver that works like this to ratchet. So I'm going to make sure the voice coil is centered in between these little slots here, and I'm only going to go hand tight. Also, one thing, if you're using these with normal radio frequencies, then you should have wired this in series. This capacitor here, I'm only using ultrasonic frequencies, so there's no point in filtering out low frequencies since I won't be actually playing any low frequencies. And I'm just going to snip the wires right here, and I'm going to separate the wires and strip off the insulation at the tips. Now I'm going to attach these to the banana plugs. So to do this, I'm going to remove the outer washer. Next step, I'm going to wire these to the banana plug. Then I'm going to slip the wire around the stud, keeping in mind the polarity of the speaker. So this capacitor is connected to the positive side, so I need to make sure and do the positive wire. So this is the silver wire, silver wire. So I'm going to put this around the positive banana plug. Actually, I'm going to twist it the other way. So you want to twist the wire so that when you tighten the nut, it'll tighten the wire around it. So that means it should be going this way. Next, I'm going to get the wrench on the outer nut to tighten it down. If you have another wrench that's the same size, you would hold the inner one and lock the outer nut against it. I don't have one, so I'm just going to hold it with my fingers. Now I'm just going to repeat the same step for the negative wire on the bottom banana plug. With the speakers wired up and the extension cord ready, I've plugged it into the back, and now this is ready to go. So you just plug this into your amplifier and you should get signal all the way. Also, one thing to note for the extension cord, you need to make sure it's the correct size wire for how much wattage you're outputting. This is a 50-foot cord, and these can output at most 600 watts between both of them. So I know this is 14 gauge wire, so that's more than enough. Other than that, this is all there is to it. Thanks for watching.